Unfortunately, we seem to not have the good representative.
There he is.
Oh, is he here?
Sorry, Madam Chair. I just got switched to a panelist. I was just waiting for it to reload. I apologize for the delay.
No worries. Hi, welcome to the committee. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Representative Lanoue, Senator Anwar in your absence, Senator Martin, Representative Dauphiné, and members of the Committee on Children. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today in support of HB 6417 regarding background checks. My name is Greg Howard, and I am a member of this General Assembly serving my first term in our House of Representatives. I'm a 19-year police veteran, having served these last 5 years of my career as a detective, where I've had the unfortunate experience of investigating crimes against children. Outside of these obligations, I'm the president of Stonington Youth Football and Cheer, a nonprofit organization for tackle football and cheerleading in my district. I'm very proud of my program, most notably its Play for Free status. Since 2018, Stonington Youth Football has not collected a single registration fee for any participant. Our annual budget is just under $30,000 per year, all of which comes from fundraising. This Play for Free status has allowed children of all socioeconomic statuses to participate, have fun, exercise, and most importantly, be around positive mentors that will have long-lasting positive impact on the nearly 160 kids that participate in our program. Due to my 8 divisions, in 2019, I had over 40 coaches who volunteered with us. Each of these 40 coaches was subjected to a background check through a third-party vendor. Today, that company charges $16 per person to conduct a social security number trace, a query of the sex offender registry, global watch list, and national criminal search. I know these background checks are not required, and I know that in many organizations they are not being done. It is important to know that simply having some criminal record does not preclude someone from volunteering with us. We have had volunteers with data misdemeanor offenses that served us and our children very well. Our board of directors carefully considers any applicant with any history to determine the suitability. In the course of my career, I have conducted numerous background checks on police officers, hundreds of background checks on firearm permit applicants, and I currently do fingerprinting for public school applicants in my town. I know what it takes to run a youth organization, I know how background checks work, and I know all too well the devastating effect that can occur from unsuitable adults having access to children. I urge you all to support this legislation, and I am happy to take questions today or any time that the members of this committee feel that my experience may be useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Representative. I just, since we have a lot of bills on the agenda today, I'm assuming you're talking about the background checks for camps, correct?
Yes, if I had the bill number wrong, I apologize. I know it changed, but I believe it's 6417. That was my intent.
Gotcha. Okay. So I have a few questions if you don't mind.
I do not mind at all.
There has been some pushback on the idea of including municipal camps in this legislation. So let me ask you this. Do you believe if we did exclude them from the legislation, that someone who does not want to subject themselves to a background check would ultimately skip the licensed camps and just go straight to the municipal camps where they don't have to do a background check?
Undoubtedly. I have a unique position in my town. Because I've been a policeman here for 2 decades, I know a whole lot about a whole lot of people. I have had people who wanted to volunteer in our program who I have said, we conduct a background check, and I think we both know how that's going to go, and they choose not to apply. The point that I'm driving at to yours, Madam Chair, is yes, if people know that background checks are being done and they know they have a background that will exclude them, they will seek other places for sure.
And in your line of work, you get to unfortunately see kind of what we call the ugly underbelly, right?
Sure.
And so one question that I have is, if someone is intent on abusing a child, if they are seeking out, whether it be a job, a paid position, or a volunteer position, they're seeking out working with children. Do you believe that any amount of training regarding, hey, don't abuse children, do you believe that any amount of training is going to change their mind?
Well, you know, that's a good question, and it's an onion that needs to be peeled back on several levels. But in essence, I'll tell you my experience as a police officer. It's not all that common to find eclectic criminals. For example, you get a criminal history, you'll notice a bunch of larcenies, burglaries, robberies, or you'll notice a bunch of violence offenses, or a bunch of domestics, or alcohol-related offenses. Very uncommon to see a hodgepodge of all of that. It happens, but it's not the norm. So when you take that into concern of criminal histories, especially of sexual offenders, I think that certainly if they're a sexual offender, they're going to be a sexual offender. There's something in their mind or their person that allows them to commit those crimes against children. And I think to your point that that is going to be the way.
Yeah. So I believe that you have put forward, please correct me if I'm wrong, you've put forward legislation that would subject coaches to these background checks because it's not currently in statute, correct?
Yes, that legislation is not on your agenda today, but certainly they are very close cousins, right? But
yes, they are.
But yes, I have put that forward.
So a lot of the feedback that I've been receiving outside of the legislature is, oh, but we take safe sport, and so coaches know what is appropriate behavior and what is not appropriate behavior. But in your testimony of the question I just asked a few minutes ago is that you agree with me that no amount of training is going to actually stop someone from abusing if that's what they're intent on doing, correct?
That's correct. And it's important to know too, Madam Chair, that many sex offenders are acquaintances of their victims, especially when we're talking about youth. And they're able to do that because they're sly enough to go through a process that we call grooming in my field. And what that means is they don't run out and sexually assault a child like that. Okay. What they do is they establish a relationship of trust with not only the child, but the parents and any person overseeing that person. And that allows them the gateway, if you will, to have access to that child where they can be alone with them, because that's when the actual assault takes place. And I will tell you from my experience that a brief story, if you'll indulge me for just a moment,
please,
where I had a young man who plays football for me, 9 years old, and he was staying with his grandmother. His mother was out of town. And I got a phone call late at night from mom saying there's some incidents going on in the neighborhood where he lives, and he's very nervous. He's scared. He doesn't want to stay with grandma anymore. He wants to be with you. Can you please go get him? I know it's late. Now, of course, I said yes. I got in my car. I picked him up, brought him here. He spent the night here with my family, and my wife got him ready for school in the morning. Now, fortunately, my wife and I are very well intended. We never hurt anybody. But that's the sort of trust that parents have in their coaches. And you can see in that instance, if I had ill intent, the access that I would have. And I'm not criticizing this mother, right? She's known me and et cetera. But that you can see how that can go sideways in a hurry, especially when you're talking about members of the population that are more vulnerable on a variety of scales.
Right. We've seen nationally, we've seen scandals within USA Swimming and USA Gymnastics, which is, pretty much exactly what you're talking about. And we have a bill here in this committee that actually would require any time a parent signs up a child for sports or for a youth group or anything in which they are in the care of an adult, that they also receive information on what grooming looks like, how to trust your gut instincts, and who to contact if you feel you're being groomed or if you've been abused. So this committee this year is passing legislation that kind of fits as puzzle pieces to the greater good of stopping sexual assault of children. And it sounds to me like you would most likely be in favor of these, and I will certainly share them with you offline. But I think that your expertise as both a coach and a police officer is really, really important. And, as the chairwoman of this committee now for a second term, I did comment on this bill last year that, I have seen a basketball coach literally lay on top of a child for 10 seconds. I mean, I had 10 seconds. That's a long time. And I had to run from across the room to stop it. We had an umpire actually ask my daughter intimate questions that he shouldn't have been asking. And her coaches didn't listen to her, by the way. My daughter spoke up. Coaches didn't listen. During the championship game, my daughter threw her glove on the ground and started screaming, "I don't feel safe." This is stuff that is out there and it is happening. And we need to not only teach kids and parents how to speak up, but we need to stop people from getting into these positions, and that requires background checks. I appreciate your testimony so very much, and I really hope that we can continue to work together moving forward on the numerous bills that we have in this committee that we're going to hopefully pass through this year. So thank you very much, Representative. And now I'd like to pass it on to Representative Lanoue for some questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, how are you?
Very well, sir. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. I want to echo what the chair had said, complimenting you on your years of service as a police detective, in 19 years law enforcement, and also the president and coach of the youth football league in your town of Stonington. Your plethora of knowledge and experience is invaluable, I think, to this committee as we move forward on this very important legislation. I just wanted to follow. I had a lot of similar questions that Representative Lanoue has, but regarding acquaintances, you mentioned the acquaintances and grooming a victim. In your expertise in law enforcement, would you say that we can expect that somebody who is a sexual predator puts youth camps and youth sports programs at a higher target, a higher chance of somebody that's a sexual predator infiltrating those type of programs as opposed to other sectors in our society?
Yes. In fact, I'll tell you, as you see the amount of people that volunteer in these programs drop off, as you've seen in the last several years, there's communication among pedophiles where that's a hotbed. You know, these folks, illicit and horrific as their activities may be, they don't operate a whole lot different than the rest of us. You know, for example, Representative, you and I were both fishermen. We would maybe have a discussion about the easiest place to catch fish, where the most fish are, et cetera. And I think that it's important to know that all sorts of criminals have these networks that you may not be aware of, whether we're talking narcotics or in the context of this, you know, pedophilia, where yes, they share their information, and I think that is a place where they could do it. And I'll tell you, getting volunteers is not easy. And maybe to the chairwoman's point, you know, standing up and tell people you don't belong here is not easy. It's not fun. It doesn't make you very popular. But you know, I have a program to run, and my name's on it, and every one of those 160 kids are my responsibility. So we run our background checks, and we keep track of coaches that are new, et cetera. So yes.
Can you speak to the likelihood of a sex offender or sexual predator reoffending? If they do it once, will they do it again and again and again? Has that been your experience in law enforcement?
Yes. Again, I think that there's something in them that has them commit those crimes. I think to a previous speaker's point, the statistics on that are very difficult to get down to because, you know, you could look, you know, I have some here where, you know, sometimes, you know, there's a 3% recidivism rate after 3 years, but 15 years is 24%. But that can't account for unreported incidences. I mean, many people have come in who file a sexual assault complaint that happened in the past, and there's some catalyst that gave them the courage to feel safe enough to come in and make that report. If not for that, that one would have been unreported too. So I shudder to think what that number may be. I know it's large. I've asked the Child Advocacy Center for some data back from them because that data wouldn't necessarily hit NIBRS, which is the crime data, because there's a lot of reports that ACA, the CAC investigates or helps out with, I should say, that don't end up in a courtroom. So those are there. But yes, to your question, the answer to that is yes. I think that the recidivism rate is high. And I think that for most people who are charged with these crimes, they've already offended previously.
Thank you for the answer. Would you also say that's equally true for those who are convicted? They're already convicted such child sexual predators. That there's still there's a high risk they will.
They're definitely a high risk. And again, Representative, the data is going to be skewed on that because, you know, especially when you look in Connecticut, because our judicial system does take a pretty hard line on these cases. So, their opportunity becomes limited in a lot of regards, because once you're convicted of something, unless you move away, people sort of know about those crimes in a small town. But in a city, maybe not. In small towns like mine or yours, the press log is sort of what people do. That's how they keep up. It's like their own little reality show. But in cities, that may not happen. And it's not that hard to move from New Haven County to New London County and have someone not know who you are.
Right, or even move from one state to another.
Or from another state.
On the now you mentioned you touched on that you do background checks in the coursework of police work on municipal employees. Can you speak to what some of those checks look like? What that consists of?
Yes. So I often get asked, what's the difference between a fingerprint supported background check and a non-fingerprint supported? And the obvious answer is, well, one's supported by fingerprints and one isn't. So fingerprints are a great identifier because they're permanent and they're unique. You've had the same fingerprint since before you were born, actually, and that you have today, albeit larger, but the relationship of those ridges to one another remains the same. That's why they're a great identifier when we do criminal investigation. Okay, so why is a fingerprint supported background check better than a non-fingerprint supported? Or why, when you come in for a pistol permit and your fingerprints are already on file because you work for the DOD or a school teacher or something like that, do we ask for your prints again? Or why, when you've been arrested multiple times, do we keep getting them? That's a question I get asked often. And the answer is this. You could live in, say, Arizona, a state far from us, and commit a bunch of crimes and feasibly get to Connecticut, change your name, date of birth, social security number, and a non-fingerprint supported background check may not pick up on you, okay, because you've changed your name, social security number, all the data that you would put into a non-fingerprint supported background check. So the reason we do those fingerprints when you apply for these positions is to make sure that didn't happen, that the name and date of birth, social security number that you're giving for your background check is consistent with fingerprints that have been on file before, or to make sure that there's not a discrepancy. So in other words, those fingerprints belong to another name with another social security number and a criminal record. That's why we do them. Of course, they're more expensive, right? Because now you have people that need to read them. They take longer. I think that's been spoken about today. So a third-party background check like I do is much less expensive. I get that turnaround generally 24 to 48 hours, much quicker if there's no record. And so it's efficient, it's inexpensive. The only thing the downside of it is that it wouldn't catch those anomalies where that's happened, where somebody's changed their name and date of birth, etc. I don't know of a case where that's happened, where someone has gone through that great lengths. Sure, they do. They certainly could. But it would certainly catch everybody else.
In the municipal fingerprints, the municipal background checks, does that include fingerprints?
It does, and it's an interesting point you bring up too, Representative. So our current statute, like I say, I do fingerprints for Stonington Public School employees right now, a lot of them because they're hiring a lot of substitutes, but even if they're being a coach. So our legislation now requires that if you're going to be a coach, a teacher, et cetera, around these kids, and let's be clear about this, that most of the coaches are middle school or higher when you talk about working for the school system. So we're protecting these kids that are a bit older, who are generally more likely to advocate for themselves or come forward generally than our younger children who we don't protect. And I think that speaks to the hypocrisy or a shortfall of our current legislation.
With these municipal checks, what's typically the turnaround time?
It really varies. Right now, we're seeing a massive influx in pistol permit applications. Many municipalities are doing those electronically. I could tell you that those are about an 8 to 10 week turnaround. When you're doing them by ink, I think it's somewhere around the same, 6 to 8, last I heard. But again, it fluctuates because we don't increase the number of, because we have a big influx of pistol permit applicants, or as I say now in this town, substitute teachers coming in and the hiring that's going on at the Board of Ed. We don't adjust the staffing to accommodate for that. So you're going to see a longer lag time. So there's an ebb and flow to it, and it would all depend on the season, et cetera.
Now, as the president of the Youth Football League for Stonington, I think we had conversations, I think you've touched on it. you do background checks on all your coaches, correct?
Absolutely. And they don't come on the field without it.
And how many coaches do you have in a year?
Given year, roughly 40. We have, there's 4 cheer divisions and 4 football divisions. And so they're, average of about 5 coaches per team, give or take.
So can you speak to what those background checks consist of, what they look like?
Yeah, perfectly. So when I get them back, I get, a green clear means they don't have anything. Sometimes it's a consider and sometimes it's red. And that's, there's major issues. But the consider, generally, you'll find a previous DWI, a breach of peace, or a larceny 6, shoplifting type things. And you go through them. It'd be a very similar background check that maybe a landlord would conduct or somebody similar to that. Of course, we don't do credit. I'm not interested in their credit. It doesn't matter. But what it gives me is a social security number trace, which will tell me a bunch of addresses previously related to that name, date of birth, and social security number, which, again, sort of, validates that this is not a new identity that someone created. And then
it tells the stories. It gives you the story.
Right. Again, it sort of validates that this identification information is real. So that because you're not doing fingerprint support, as I discussed earlier. It also gives me the sex offender registry, both here and nationally, and the national crime report of any previous convictions.
What mechanism or entity do you use to conduct those checks?
This one is called Checker. It's spelled, it's like CHECKR or something like that. It's spelled not quite like the word. And I basically send an email out if you wanted to volunteer, representative. And by the way, we'd love to have you. If you want to volunteer in my program, you would get an email from me, fill out this information so I don't ever see your information. You hit submit to this third party. And then within a day or two, I get a response that, you're clear, presumably.
Very good. You said it was within a couple of days that gets turned around? Yeah. Do you keep records on all your background checks?
Their database. It's a it's archived within that particular platform. I could actually go on there right now and screen share, log in, and show all of you. We didn't have a season in 2020 for the obvious reason, but all the 2019 names of coaches, and you would be able to see next to them. And I'd be happy to do that with any member of the committee, and you could just get a firsthand look at my database or the platform that I use and the archived information from that season.
Okay, so let's assume that the committee we do pass this bill, it becomes law, and we also include programs like yours as being a requirement, right, a mandatory check. How onerous would it be to keep those checks on record and to be subject to that inspection process?
For me, not. It does it itself. So when I send that out to all my coaches, they fill it out. I get the response, and the database the platform again just shows it listed there, and it just keeps it.
Excuse me, Rep Lanoue, is there one more question? I think Rep Dauphiné has had her hand raised, and we have, I think, 11 more speakers that need to be heard during this public hearing.
Yeah, I do just have a couple more, and then I'll wrap it up. I just think with the witness we have before us, he's an expert in a number of these fields, and I think his information has been valuable. But I will try to be brief.
Thank you.
How now you feel this check, the representative, is very reliable, correct?
I think it's reliable, yes.
Okay. And again, how much do they cost?
Right now, I look for you. It's $16 if you were to do it today for the check that I run, which is inclusive of what I talked about.
Okay. All right. Well, I very much appreciate it, and I want to thank you for your testimony, representative. I should say, representative, detective, and coach.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you for your time.
Rep Dauphiné, do you have your question?
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Greg, for being here to testify, and thank you for your service to your community. So we were just talking about the background check cost, and earlier they talked about the background check costing $80, and you said $16. Would this bill implement the $80 charge, or is there a way for us to be able to do this for $16?
I think, thank you for the question, Representative. I think that it's as simple as this committee or putting forth language that at least as a first step, and I think that Commissioner Bai sort of touched on this, if I understood her appropriately, that a good first step would be a background check that doesn't necessarily have to be fingerprint supported. That would cut the cost down. It would also cut the lag time down significantly. So if I were on your committee, that I would definitely advocate for that. If that's what you're asking me, I think it's a positive step in the right direction. And again, it's not going to catch everybody. None of this is going to catch everybody, but it will deter many people, and it will catch some if they weren't deterred. And I think it's a step in the right direction, and it eliminates the cost concern to a degree. And again, my program, I stand very proud of. We do ours, and we don't charge anybody anything to play. So when we talk about cost, and it's certainly the efficiency of it.
And I appreciate that. And I mean, $16 versus $80 is a huge difference when you're looking at some of these, small overhead camps, in particular, the municipalities that we spoke about earlier that are really trying to do camp on a dime. There's a lot of church camps that do like vacation Bible school for a week during the summer. And Rep. Lanoue talked about adding those into the bill. So we're talking about camps that might occur 1 week during the summer. They have very low overhead with a lot of volunteers. So the cost of $80 could be very impactful and perhaps even eliminate their ability to either have camp or have as many children as they do have in their camps. You talked about the 8 to 10 week lag time. If you eliminated the fingerprints on those that you have done, how would that change that lag time?
So just to clarify, the ones that I do in my youth program are not fingerprint supported. So that lag time is a day to 2 days.
Okay.
Some days same day when there's no record. The background checks that I do in my profession as a police detective, specifically firearms. So if you want a firearm permit in Stonington, I would do your background on that. That's fingerprint supported. Those fingerprints are taken right now about 8 weeks. So certainly if you eliminate the fingerprint part of it, you're cutting your response time drastically.
Right, the response time, and I'm assuming the cost, right? So
sure. Yeah.
For these camps that might have somebody come in a couple of days prior, want to help out, want to volunteer, that would work well, 1 to 2 days. I just wanted you to speak a little bit to, somebody talked about the qualifiers with regard to the background check and what would qualify keeping somebody away from working with children versus allowing them to work with children. For example, maybe somebody stole a pack of cigarettes, got caught and had some kind of record versus someone who actually had a record of assaulting children. Can you speak to that a little bit and the differences on those lists that you're looking at for your counselors?
Sure, sir. I think probably Representative, when we talk in this context, it's the disqualifiers. Those things which would disqualify somebody. So again, jumping into the realm of pistol permits. So our statutes currently, you're disqualified from getting a pistol permit if you're convicted of a felon. But in Connecticut, we've also added 11 particular misdemeanors by statute. So what we do here at Stonington Youth Football is anybody that doesn't come back green, which is clear with no record, any record at all, DWI from 1992, doesn't matter, goes before the board of directors. The board of directors makes a decision on that person's suitability. So I guess it would be to this committee to determine whether you wanted to add in certain statutory disqualifiers or whether you want to leave that up to the individual agency to make determination on what's suitable for them. Because I think it's important to know, there's a variable. So in my football program, our coaches don't generally have one-to-one access to kids on a football field. It's generally, we're all there. But you can see how the grooming, and in the instance that I told you about, could, in the hands of the wrong person, could end up in a bad situation. So there may be some variables at what disqualifiers may be, depending on what sort of access that individual is going to have to children, and maybe even the age of the children.
So without a board in place, there wouldn't necessarily be any disqualifiers with, it could be open to the individual that was doing the background, that was looking at the background check and making a decision. For example, well, I don't really like that this person had this theft record and I don't think they'd be good around children or a good influence. They could make that decision. Is that true?
I would say absent statutory language. So if this committee didn't, if you were to pass the bill and the statute was moot to what disqualifiers would be, I would say that my interpretation as an organizer would be, okay, that this legislature said I have to do a background check. I've done it. But now I have this information, so now the responsibility is on me to make the right decision, whether I'm the sole deciding person for this agency, or whether in my case we have a 7-person board. However that is, it would all depend on the final language of your bill.
So you're saying that statutory language could be in the bill?
I think you could do that.
It's not there now. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I think that, let's take something obvious, 1st-degree sexual assault, right? I think, especially of a child, if you were going to make disqualifiers, I think probably we could all agree that would be one of them. So, you could do, our statutes 29-28, you can see how they said if you're convicted of these particular crimes, then you're disqualified from getting a pistol permit. I think this committee could certainly put language in there that identifies certain statutes that if you're convicted of, you're disqualified from being at a youth camp.
So because there's none in place now, when you do your background check, what do you use as a disqualifier?
Well, I think I think there's a few things that go into it. The type of offense. So again, if we're talking larcenies, bar fight, DWI, these types of things, and that's part of it. And the other part is how recent and the volume of them. So in other words, if we have a guy that comes and says, hey, I'd like to coach, and he's been, charged with or convicted of 3rd-degree assault and breach of peace or bar fights 9 times in the last 3 years, he's not a good role model for our kids in my particular program. Because in my program, football is one thing, that's X's and O's, but we teach kids discipline. We teach kids working together. I go to my kids, my ball players' schools on Fridays, and heaven help them if there's a kid sitting eating by themselves and they didn't go over to befriend that kid and left him alone like that. They're going to run, and they're going to run till I get tired, because that's not the way that we do things. So that sort of mentorship may be impacted if we have the wrong person there to that point.
I think, Rep. Howard, we can absolutely make note of some of these statutes, as we have noted in the previous discussions, that we are, this is a work in progress, and these are important things to discuss. Rep. Daphne, did you have any other questions to add?
I actually do. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So the I think you refer to, do you refer to the DCF registry as well when you're making a decision as to whether or not somebody would participate as a volunteer?
So the central registry was something that that we did not do. That was a fault of my own in 2019. I have since learned more about how to do that as a youth leader, and that will be going forward in addition to, because Checker does not do that. So we would certainly reference the central registry as well.
So are they eliminated if they are on the DCF registry?
There again, if they come up on the central registry, that's something that the board would consider. Would probably ask that person, because I don't think the central registry would give me the details of it. I frankly have concerns from my professional experience as to how simple it is to end up on that without a process and the burden of proof. So I think we would probably have that person come forward if they're willing to share the details of how that happened, and determine as a board, if they're suitable to be around our kids on a circumstantial basis. Everybody's circumstance for ending up on that is just different.
And I was just curious of how you determine that on the DCF registry, only because they have had no due process. So they have not had their day in court. So, we know that there's names on the DCF registry that were placed just merely by a complaint. And there's others that I'm sure if they did go through a court process, maybe would be prosecuted, but they have not had due process and are on that list. So I was just curious with your take on that with regard to referring to that list, because I believe that this background check would include access to that list of those individuals on the registry, including the prospect of how difficult it is to get off that list, which I've been told by several attorneys that it is very difficult to get someone off the list once you're on.
When I hear from DCF, and I've asked them specifically, hundreds of people get off that list each year. But I would caution the committee that in my experience as a police officer, I know that people have been put on that central registry that would not, under circumstances that would not deem them unsuitable necessarily to be in my program. So I think that we should cross-reference the DCF central registry. I'm under the understanding that DCF is working to update their central registry and maybe make some changes as to how people get on that, which I think is great. But again, it comes back down to the individual program and the individual circumstances for how that person got there.
Thank you for that. And earlier we heard that there's hundreds and hundreds of children that never report any kind of sexual assault. And we hear that all the time. We know that. We've heard many accounts of that. So with regard to individuals that, you know, have never had a record, what, in your experience in your own town and across the state, how many individuals do you think would be identified with this mandatory background check that have already, you know, you have already been, if you will, counselors or the like?
A difficult question to answer because I wouldn't know those numbers, but I can give you a quick instance where police responded to a place, and I don't want to get too detailed here, a place because an older individual was taking pictures of some of the younger kids that were getting in and out of the pool with his phone. To make a long story short and not too detailed, police officers were able to determine that individual had a history of sexual exploitation of minors and yet was chaperoning this trip, because whoever was in charge of it did not do a background check. And that guy was out here with kids on this school trip. That, to me, is concerning. And that is a perfect example of where that person absolutely should not have been there. And that would have been caught if a proper background check had been done.
So is that the only case you can refer to, or are there, you know, dozens, if not hundreds across the state that have been identified as a result of doing a mandatory background check?
I can't think of hundreds of cases like that, but I can tell you, and again, you know, I walk a thin line here, Representative, between the information that I know in my course of being a detective, but I will tell you that I know for sure that there are people that have been convicted of sexual crimes against minors and then subsequently convicted of them. I can't say, and again, I'm waiting for the Child Advocacy Center to give me some details, but because I only know, you know, a small section of the state in that regard. But I was told by them that it has happened where people have been convicted and no check was done, and they had access to another kid and then subsequently reoffended. So I know it does happen. I just don't know the number.
I just wanted to share with you, the CDC admits that background checks will not identify most sexual offenders because most have not been caught. Therefore, expanding the use of these background checks prevent any significant amount of sexual abuse or harassment would be probably not very, effective. But I just wanted to share that with you. I also want to take the time to thank you for your answers and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, ma'am.
Are you all set, Rep. Daphne? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rep. Howard. Representative Comey.
Actually, I believe Senator Martin had his hand up, and I'm gonna before me. I'm gonna let him go first. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Martin.
That was awfully nice. Thank you. I won't be long. Just got one question, actually. Just want to clarify. Thank you, first of all, Representative Howard. Very, very informative, what you provided us here today. Regarding the fee for your background check, third party, $16, and it does not include the fingerprinting. Should we decide to do that, what's the additional cost for your fingerprinting?
I think, thank you, Senator, for your question, and thank you for your service on this committee as well. I believe you would land here in Connecticut between state and local somewhere around, I think it's $88. I know 80 was quoted, but you wouldn't run those two simultaneously. It would be redundant, basically. So if I were to say tomorrow, well, I really want to be adamant about this, and I'm going to have my coaches do the $88, I wouldn't spend the 16 in addition. I would get the same information. I would get, you know, the information that I got from the third party would be more than likely exactly the same that I got from fingerprint supported, unless, again, like I say, somebody has changed their identity. But other than that would be, I believe, where you'd land.
Got it. So the fingerprinting path, so to speak, would be all inclusive.
Oh, for sure. Well, although it would not include the central registry. So your fingerprint supported background checks that you would get back would be those criminal background checks, et cetera, with references to watch lists, et cetera. But you wouldn't get the central registry specific to Connecticut, I don't believe. So you'd have to do that separately.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Representative Comey?
Actually, that's great that I let the senator go first because mine sort of piggybacks on him. Thank you for your all the background information, Representative Howard. So that was actually one of the things I was going to point out is that we're talking about fingerprinting as well. The central registry, does that cost additional money? Because to clarify, the $88 is what the early childhood programs are paying. So there's that. But does the central registry cost additional money?
No. Again, we didn't run that in 2019 because I wasn't quite familiar with the process, but my understanding is no, that you don't have to pay them money. You said they have to sign a form, and I think the commissioner could probably answer that a bit better than I did, but I believe they just have to sign a waiver. You know, I call him an applicant, you know, who wants to be a coach, sign a waiver, and then I would just find out yay or nay if they're on there.
Okay, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
that
Thank you.
clarification. And then just one final that story about the chaperone on the trip is, you know, every parent's worst nightmare, right?
Sure.
But in that instance, what level of check would have flagged that person?
Provided that individual had never changed his name, date of birth, or social security number when he applied, the check that I do would have caught it.
Okay, that is good information. Thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Representative Howard?